Chapter 13. The Cure of Wounds Which Would Not Heal, the Treatment of Burns. I was destined to prove the value of urine therapy in the treatment of wounds, when some years ago, through an accident, I suffered a grave laceration and injury to my toes, ankle, and foot. The toenails were torn off, and the toes forced back into the fleshy part of the foot. Naturally, the shock and pain were very severe. All the same, I rejected the help of a medical friend, as I was resolved once again to prove the effects of urine treatment on wounds. After having the damaged portions of my foot put into place by some physical culture practitioners who had witnessed the accident, I fasted 4 days for the shock, an approved method, and applied cloths saturated in old urine to the affected parts. These bandages were kept moist by repeated soakings, but were not unwound until the 5th day. When finally removed, the results were astonishing. All trace of the injury had disappeared, and the foot was healthy and supple as it had been in early youth. Incidentally, a corn which had troubled me was dissolved by the treatment. I have frequently observed similar effects even on wounds which had refused to heal, whether under the treatment of common medical, herbal, or other remedies, and even where amputation had been seriously discussed as the only remaining course to pursue. From among a large number of cases I have treated, I will now give the history of a particularly bad one which came under my care in 1918. In that year I was introduced to a man in the early 40s, who at the time was attending a local infirmary as an outpatient every week for a bullet wound in the forearm. Although the patient had received the wound a year previously, it had shown no signs of healing, was about 10 inches in length and 3/8 of an inch in width, and at times ulcerous and suppurating. His medical advisers were afraid it might ultimately turn gangrenous, to avoid which poisonous ointments and dressings were applied, with many changes in the ingredients and proportions in the mixings. Having got sick of orthodox methods, the patient had also resorted to Fletcherism and the Salisbury treatment, from which admittedly he had derived some benefit, but even so that wound refused to heal. In spite of objections from his wife, he eventually became my patient. My assistants first set about ripping off all the dressings. Then we washed the wounded arm 3 times a day with old urine, giving the rest of the body lengthy periods of massage with the bare hands and the same species of urine. The patient was fasted for 3 days on his own urine plus cold water. Short spells of sunbathing were advocated. At the end of 7 more days, nothing remained on the fissure but a very slight scar as thin as a gold thread. In short, after a whole year's interference treatment, the patient was cured by nature in 10 days. Since the date of this cure, I have observed scores of cases of, quote, miraculous healing by identically the same method. These include the healing of painful and disabling wounds, cuts, sores, ill effects from rusty nails, fish bones, etc., also poisonous wounds and blood poisoning generally. As a rule, a long penance was not required. Cases taken early have responded to 3 or 4 days' treatment, whilst those which have been medically interfered with and almost rendered gangrenous have taken from 10 to 18 days. With regard to burns, one reads that in a given year 7,900 Americans, almost half the number of which were children under 5, died of burns, or did they die of the treatment, or of both combined. As to thousands of Americans who survived the effects of burns, they were destined to suffer from unsightly scars, tight puckered skin, stiffened limbs, or useless limbs and fingers. For years, the standby among remedies for burns was the application of wet tea leaves. Then, in 1925, Dr. Davidson of Detroit placed the old wives' remedy on a quasi-scientific basis. Instead of the boiled tea leaves, he applied the element derived therefrom, which, as we all know, is called tannic acid. This poisonous substance literally tans the tissues, and a thick, hard crust then forms over the exposed nerve ends. But although it relieves the pains, it checks the activity of and flow of the body fluids to the parts, the while it acts as a covering under which it is hoped that new skin may form. Unfortunately, however, the tannic acid not only tans the burned tissues, but also the surrounding healthy tissues, and the result that it destroys cells which ought to be providing new cells for the knitting together of the skin elements, if I may thus express it for the benefit of the lay mind. The final outcome is a disfiguring scar, which is preventable by natural methods as opposed to scientific ones. Tannic acid is not even bacterial, for if foreign matter lurks on the burned surface, the function of the microscopic scavengers, which science calls germs, is impeded, and infection is more likely to persist under the supposedly protective crust. In the attempt to kill germs, we merely manacle the policeman. The tannic acid treatment of burns was superseded by the picric acid treatment and also the acroflavine treatment. Then the surgeons tried their methods. They took skin from another part of the body, usually the buttocks, and grafted it onto the burnt portions. But unfortunately, it sometimes occurred that the wound left by the removal of the healthy tissue turned septic. As to the suffering for the patient, which this method entails, it can be better imagined than described. Not that I wish to decry surgery, where in the case of accidents and mutilation from war it is necessary, but I am constrained to say that surgery has greatly been abused and continues to be abused, and thousands of unneeded operations are performed on organs which could be treated by natural methods. Nevertheless, some doctors have been broad-minded and enterprising enough to try urine therapy, as witness the following extract from a letter to me in 1935 by Dr. Geo. S. Cotton of Temple, Texas, USA. Since receiving your literature some months ago, I have put it, urine therapy, to the test, and the results have been astonishing. Urine in the treatment of wounds, etc., cannot be beaten. This healing power is brought about, among other elements contained in urine, by allontane, C4H6O3N4. As I put urine to further use in the treatment and eradication of disease, I shall send you full information. It appears to me you are furthering a great truth which should be broadcast to suffering humanity. End of chapter.